Hey, so I'm going to get straight to the point with this one, try not to make it too long. Some of my videos are longer than than I intend them to be. I want to talk about the subject of so-called progressive politics. Now, this term progressive seems to be particularly used in the United States. We don't really use the term in the UK. I'm not sure about Canada. I think Canada may use the term progressive as well. Broadly speaking, in the political context, it tends to refer to people, or people themselves tend to be describing themselves as progressive if they hold very, what can be seen as traditionally left wing views. I hate the term progressive on the grounds that the word itself, as an adjective, indicates something that is positively moving forward. But there is something incredibly obnoxious about saying that only this political view is positively moving forward. That's why I don't like progressive as a term, because it insinuates that if you're not progressive, then you must be a horrible bigot. By American standards, I'd probably be a moderate, what is classified as a moderate. I call myself a centrist, but in the American political context, I would probably be a moderate. The thing about progressive politics, and it's sort of like this in battle among the Democrats in the way that being a true conservative is among Republicans. So I really feel sorry for American moderates at the moment because they seem to be sidelined. Um, what irritates me about the whole progressive thing is unless you have a certain way of thinking, then you're automatically deemed to be a bigot, or at least, oh, you must be a conservative if you're not progressive. That to me is incredibly narrow thinking. I mean, basically, it goes along these lines. Unless you are a neo feminist, ultra believer in transgenderism and so forth and so on, then you must be a bigot. In other words, there's actually a very narrow scope of thinking within so called progressive politics because you have to align yourself with certain very narrow factions. And unless you think in a certain way, then you're going to be deemed as a bigot. This is inevitable. So called progressive politics is also about toxic political correctness. And I hate it, to be quite honest. I'm not saying I hate all the views, but I hate the narrow thinking that embodies so called progressive politics. There's nothing progressive about dictating that the only way you could be forward thinking is to align yourself with certain views. That's not, in terms of the adjective, progressive. It should call itself for what it is, which is neoliberal thinking. It's neoliberalism, it's not progressive. There is a historical context, of course, which to my understanding, I'm no expert on this, but it's quite different, and that is the progressive era, which was from Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. But that was more to do with economics as opposed to social progressive issues. Um, so yeah, this is a little bit of a rant against the terminology itself. Um, that's it. If you disagree with me, fine, but all I'm saying is that I don't believe it is open minded to dictate that people need to think in a certain way in order to be seen as forward thinking. I believe it's very possible to be pro egalitarianism, pro human rights, pro liberty, without necessarily being pro ultra feminism or sort of getting into the line of thinking that anything goes, which is basically what progressivism is in this political context. Anything goes. That's how I see progressive politics. And I get a bit tired of it, to be quite honest.